the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
Last month, Luno announced that its South African customers could buy tokenized stocks and ETFs, or exchange-traded funds. Now, this includes major US-listed companies like Apple, Alphabet, Nvidia, and Tesla, as well as indices like the S&P 500. The platform launched with 44 stocks in early August, that was last month, but has since added 15 more. Now, cast your mind back 4 or 5 years, and this would have seemed almost impossible. Yet here we are, buying stock derivatives on a crypto platform. Valor too offers a range of tokenized stocks on its platform. Perhaps even more dramatic is the rise of stablecoins, now worth more than $230 billion. And all of this happened barely 5 years after they first appeared on the market. Stablecoins were originally developed as a way to park crypto profits in something more stable, but now the use cases have obviously multiplied. It's time to check in with Christo de Wit, country manager for South Africa at Luno. Hi, Christo, and thanks again for your time. It's early days since you launched tokenized stocks, but give us a quick progress report. What's the market response so far?
Oh, thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me again. The response so far has been very, very positive. We've seen quite a lot of excitement in the market. When we first announced we were going to bring tokenized stocks to our South African customers, and rightfully, as you mentioned, we initially launched 44 stocks, then adding 50 more, now offering a total of 61 to not only our South African customers, but also this week to our Nigerian customers, where we launched in Nigeria as well. But speaking more specifically around South Africa, quite significant, more than 10,000 customers purchased or invested in tokenized stocks in that first month. And that was quite significant. And we've seen some interesting trades. I think one of our largest trades that we've seen was over $12,000. So there is significant interest in this. And I think this just is a catalyst for the direction that the interest in blockchain and crypto assets is growing in South Africa.
For those not familiar with tokenized stocks, give us a brief explanation, because these aren't the stocks that you would buy, for example, on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, right?
No, so these stocks are a tokenized or a digital representation of those stocks. So very similar to what a stable coin represents, or how a stable coin works, is these tokenized stocks are digital representations of those actual shares in those companies. So the custodian purchases or invests in those stocks. It sits in a safe custody. And then the stocks that you purchase on Luno is a digital representation of that. Obviously, with that, there's some caveats that needs to be considered. Obviously, there's no direct ownership of that actual share, where the investor holds ownership of the digital tokenized version of that share. And in terms of voting rights, obviously, this doesn't come into play when we look at tokenized stocks. But again, I think when we look at the interest and the access that these tokenized stocks or tokenized US stocks gives, is that this is not necessarily the major concern for most of our customers. They just want access and exposure to those shares in a way that is much easier and more streamlined than going through a traditional broker.
Right. So you are using a third party here that supplies these tokenized stocks. I guess an obvious question would be, what happens, for example, if when a dividend gets paid out and you own a Tesla as a digital stock? What happens when there's a share split? All of these kind of events that can happen.
No, very interesting. I mean, when in terms of dividends, so these dividends are reinvested directly into the share and just automatically added to the amount of shares that you own. And that also is within very safe custody that meets all of our stringent security and safety measures that, our customers have come to know and expect from Luno. And this is one of the key considerations that we took into account as well, is how do we bring this level of access and security to South African customers in a way that enables them to purchase these US tokenized stocks, not having to convert into US dollar, but with their South African rand and with as little as 20 rand.
It'd be interesting to see what's your thought on this, where tokenized stocks are going in the future. There are a lot of advantages to getting tokenized stocks rather than having to go through an exchange or a fund manager. Do you see this as eventually becoming the way that people access stocks in the future?
I really do. I think we are at actually quite a watershed moment when it comes to this level of investing and the way that the traditional financial landscape is shifting. I mean, just earlier today, the Nasdaq filed for permission from the Securities Exchange Commission in the US to allow tokenized stocks on the Nasdaq as well. So I really see this as a significant paradigm shift in the way that the traditional financial sector is going to take it forward. And I think that's once again where we see this synergy between what we've come to know as Web3 or decentralized finance, and now the traditional financial space, where they are getting much closer and closer together. And we see that there are actually quite a lot of synergies. So I mean, to answer your question, yes, I do think the future going forward is pretty much aligned with being on the blockchain and what tokenization enables.
And I guess it should be pointed out as well that you can trade you can trade 24/7, 5 days a week, not during the weekends, which is a big advantage. You can trade through the night, Monday to Friday. And that's a big advantage because, the Asian market opens and you see what way the trends are going. And you might want to bail out at some point, and you can do that. Yeah. I guess a fairly obvious question people would want to know is, how does it compare buying a tokenized stock in terms of costs with the traditional way?
So I think when you look at the cost structure from traditional brokers, there's a lot of hidden costs that are not necessarily immediately visible. So in Luno, we charge a 1%, and then in that there's a certain level of spread that we also need to take into account. But when you look at the traditional brokerage and how that goes to play, is there significant FX costs that needs to be considered? And that's not always very transparently communicated, or there's a very significant a document that is shared that explains it in detail. It's not necessarily that obvious. And that's one of the ways that we've also tried to simplify it and be more transparent in that way, in bringing a product to market that would enable our customers to get in very easily with limited barriers, like break down that barrier to entry. And as you say, to give them more control over that. I think that instant nature of the instant buy and sell in terms of tokenized stocks is also quite significant. If you go through a traditional broker, I mean, you know all too well that there are those waiting periods that also apply. So I think that is one of the key value propositions, to rather go the route of a tokenized stock than they actually holding the physical stock, in contrary.
I don't know if you know the answer to this one, but have you got any sense of what are the most popular stocks on your platform? People keen on buying Tesla or Apple or what?
I think, I mean, it quite closely mimics the big movers and shakers, very similar to what we see in the traditional crypto space, where your Bitcoin and Ethereums are the most popular ones. And we definitely see from customer uptake that Tesla, Apple, Nvidia, they're all quite very popular, and those accounts for the stocks that most of our customers initially were drawn to. But we also see it quite a leveling out, in terms of the broader spectrum. I think that the ETF tokenized stocks also brings quite a level of diversity that our customers are very interested in as well.
Let's change subject quickly. Stable coins, I mentioned in the beginning, these were launched pretty much 5-6 years ago. Today, they've got a market capitalization, just the two big ones, Tether and USDC, which is issued by Circle. $230 billion. What's going on here? And are you seeing these same trends at Luno?
Yeah, very significant. I think stable coins are very, very relevant at the moment. I think each of the crypto cycles have these headline themes that kind of drive them. And I really think in this bull cycle that we're in, that stable coins are one of the key driving themes that we get to know. And rightfully so. I think the adoption globally has really significantly increased. You spoke about the market capitalization being very, very significant. I recently saw a projection that if we're going on this current trajectory, we could see that market capitalization surpass $2 trillion by 2028. And then it's very similar and at the adoption rate that we see at Luno. I think if we look at both USDC and USDT, I think the utility that they carry amongst traders is that easy vehicle for arbitrage trading. It's also an entry point in terms of doing, high volume and high frequency trading on crypto exchanges. But then if we look at our other markets, and for instance, in Nigeria and other markets that Luno offer, it also enables customers to have that hedge against inflation, against currencies that are not necessarily performing so well. So there's a lot of utility that stablecoins bring, and we can really see that in terms of the global adoption. I mean, even in the US, with the introduction of the Genius Act, signed into law, which was a bipartisan law, really regulating the issuance of stablecoins in the US, which would primarily set the precedent, I think, globally as well. There's a significant shift in the importance of stablecoins and what that means for, decentralized finance as a whole.
Finally, Christo, let's talk about some of the regulatory developments around the world concerning crypto. You've spoken about the Genius Act, which basically introduces regulations for the issuance of stablecoins, and they've got to be backed by certain classes of assets. In other words, it's got to be 100% collateralized. But what's caught your attention in the regulatory space, and what does this mean for South Africans?
Yeah, I think the Genius Act is quite significant in terms of global regulation. We know that in Europe, the MiCA laws also have very clear stipulations regarding stablecoins. And I think when we operate in a framework where there's regulatory clarity, it really drives responsible growth. And I think that's what we'll see mimicked over in South Africa as well, that there would be an eventual clear stablecoin framework being adopted by local regulators. But I think bringing it a little bit closer to home at the moment, I think the biggest question mark that we have in South Africa still remains around exchange control regulation and how that applies to cryptocurrency. We've had that recent High Court ruling in Gauteng that clearly stated that cryptocurrency at this stage falls outside of exchange control regulations, where the judge was quite firm. Cryptocurrency has been around since 2009. It cannot possibly take that long to include it under the purview of exchange control. We know that is currently being appealed, but that kind of sets the precedent that there is a level of urgency to have clarity around exchange control and where that externalization of funds happen with cryptocurrency. So I think looking at South Africa, that's going to be the most significant change that we are expecting to see over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, just finally, on that particular court case that you mentioned that was I think it was in the Joburg High Court, and it had to do with an insolvency matter, the liquidation of a company that had externalized tens of millions of rand in Bitcoin to an overseas exchange. And the judge did make that ruling. What is your legal advice from your legal counsel about this? The fact that it's been appealed by the Reserve Bank, I think the Reserve Bank was the respondent in this case. Does that mean that at the moment we're in no man's land? This is a completely gray area and there are no regulations governing the externalization of cryptocurrencies?
It's a difficult question to ask and give a straightforward answer to that. But I think when we look at the way that the case has been appealed, it does create that loophole, that lack of clarity, because there is no clear indication from the Reserve Bank. There's no clear reporting structure or BOB codes in place for cryptocurrency. And I think that then enables a lot of people to see this as a potential loophole that they can exploit. But we do also know that the Reserve Bank is working quite hard on closing that gap with firm instruction from the judge, and whilst we wait on the ruling from that appeal.
And on that note, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much, Christo de Wit, Country Manager for South Africa at Luno.
Thank you so much, Kieran.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.